Today we are at Thetford Priory in the town of Thetford, which is around Norfolk, East Anglia. There we go. It's in East Anglia, which is a county here in the UK. And Priory was founded in 1103 by Roger Bigod, B-I-G-O-D. No idea how to pronounce it. That was his name. A name that will come in, is related to a visit that happened later in the day. Not part of this video, but will be part of the blog. The Priory was affiliated with the Benedictine Abbey at Cluny in France, and was, quite large and vast back in its day. Obviously not as big or vast now. Well, it's still big, it's just as you can see. It survived until 1540, when during the Reformation it was suppressed and fell into disrepair, and some of the stone was stolen away for other purposes, leaving what we have today. The priory, or the monastery, was built in the traditional style. You had the cloister, the square open area with the covered walkway around the outside, where the monks would work and pray and meditate and such. Attached to that was the church itself, with the altar to the east, the nave to the west, traditional style, transepts north and south, so that it was shaped like a cross to remind us that Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross to save us. So the work on the church began in 1107, and the presbytery, the east end of the church, was probably complete by 1114. At the same time, much of the rest of the monastery would have been complete. The living space for the monks, so they would have been able to move in at that time. The nave itself most likely took another 60 years to complete, being as large and fantastic as they tended to be. It took a while to build those things. It was used as a priory for many hundreds of years, until, again, the Reformation came along. In 1540 it was suppressed, as was typical of churches at the time that were large and wealthy, and this was one of those that was large and wealthy. Controlled a lot of land that the king, and had a lot of wealth that it had accumulated that the king wanted, so the king took it. In fact, it says here, on the 16th of February, 1540, the last prior and monks surrendered to the king's commissioners. That was the end. The prior's lodging, which we will see a bit later towards the end of the video, that was occupied as a house for the next 200 years, undergoing much alteration. However, by the 1820s, it was roofless ruin, and that was pretty much, the end of the priory. Continued to decay over time, and we have what we have now. As you can see, I've been trying to, in the video, get a shot of the little placards that show what each of the different spaces are. It was quite large. You can see there, just off the top of the frame, that's the prior's house. Oh, leaving the frame. But again, we'll come back to that once we, the prior's lodging. We'll get back to that after we go through the nave and the presbytery and the church. few elements of note. Their Lady Chapel, which we'll see once we get towards the altar end of the nave, that was built in the 13th century because a vision of the Virgin Mary is said to have appeared to the locals and requested they build a Lady Chapel onto the church, so they did. The church had many relics back in the day, which attracted pilgrims to both see and pray and search for healing and whatnot. The priory also housed the tombs of the Howard dynasty. The Howard dynasty, including Catherine Howard, the fifth, or the Howard dynasty, where Catherine Howard came from that family. She was the fifth wife of Henry VIII, and one of the ones who lost her head. But yes, the priory housed the tombs of the Howard dynasty, Henry Fitzroy, the first Duke of Richmond and Somerset, and a few other early Tudor dynasty officials. When the priory was dissolved, some of those were reburied in other churches nearby. Here we're about to pass into the presbytery. This area, as you can see, the sign right there, this area would have been closed off to the average person behind a screen, which was very typical. The nave was open to everybody, but this area was only for the monks and visiting dignitaries who were granted access, or were allowed access, I should say. You can see the multiple steps leading up to the altar. Over here, we're now in the Lady Chapel, which was mentioned earlier, and was built according to a vision. The chapel, or the priory itself, I should say, did not remain static during its life. It did see several renovations and upgrades over the years, modifications here and there. However, the transepts, it would appear, the north and south transepts, those remained from the original construction. Those are original construction. The presbytery originally, instead of having a squared off altar, it had a rounded altar that was much more common in the Norman church. The nave, however, it came a bit later, as it did take 60 years to build. For example, so right now we're in a bit of the Norman portion of the church, original construction. This here is a sacristy. This came along in somewhere in the 15th century, most likely, is the estimate, including the little section of wall by the well that was off the top of the frame a bit ago. See a bit of the the height of the ruins that still remain. Now this path, you can see a little bit of it goes off to the right. That does lead to the original gatehouse. This being a home for monks and such. It had a wall. It was protected from the rabble outside, and you needed a way to get in and out. That was the gatehouse. That was protected. Not quite as fortified as a castle would have been, but sadly that gatehouse is on private land, and although they do allow access to it, there is a gate that was locked today, so no access today. But there is an agreement between English Heritage and the owners of the property to allow people to visit the gatehouse, which is still maintained by English Heritage. But yeah, I guess the owners of the property just didn't unlock it today. Again, this is the prior's lodging. The prior being the one in charge, similar to how at an abbey you have an abbot running the place. Here, a priory, you have a prior running the place, overseeing all of the business and non-business of the place, keeping it running. Not much of this left. You can tell it has seen much remodeling. The red brick was very popular, most very likely Tudor in origin. Would have been multiple stories back in the day. We'll see up ahead here a bit of timber, which looks very old. Wondering if that's original. Don't know, but we'll see it in frame here in a moment. It does look very weather-worn, has a plate of steel or of metal underneath it supporting it. So it could be some original wood, or many hundred-year-old wood. I don't know. Unfortunately, there was no information on it, but I thought it was interesting. It's very common to see a lot of the stone survive, but rarely do you see much wood survive, being something that decays easily. Looking back at the prior's lodging. Bit of some information there on it. With that, one last look of the priory.